time. And you say all this stuff about how it's better for mothers. What's wrong with sending your 6-month-old to a nursery, to daycare?
So daycare, for a variety of reasons, is very bad for children. The right brain, the social emotional part of the brain, is 85% developed by the age of 3. And mothers perform a number of things, number of roles in those first 3 years that helps that right brain to grow. One of the things they do is buffer children from stress. That's one of their major roles. In most parts of the world, babies are born on their mother's bodies to keep the cortisol levels down, to raise the oxytocin levels, which is the love hormone, and to keep the stress levels, the cortisol hormone, down. And what we're doing is we're separating mothers and babies at such an early age that it's stimulating the stress-regulating part of the brain, the amygdala, which is meant to remain offline for the first year. Baby stress levels are supposed to be very, very low while their brains are developing in the first year. When we separate a mother from a baby, that baby no longer feels safe because they need something called attachment security, and it creates a great amount of stress. The salivary cortisol levels go up very high. Those babies have a higher incidence of things like aggression, behavioral problems, and anxiety later in their school, and even immediately. I mean, we're seeing almost immediately that babies' stress levels are so high, they're developing anxiety, depression, ADHD, and more aggression. And so, basically separating mothers and babies, or separating babies from their primary attachment figures in those early years, causes too much stress for that baby's brain.
So do you think, Erica, a lot of the issues that we're seeing with our youngsters now, the Gen Z generation, can be tracked right the way back to the way that we raised them as infants?
Oh, absolutely. Not just Gen Z, but even before that, so this started, you would say, the movement to separate mothers and babies. I mean, I suppose you could say historically it started with the Industrial Revolution when mothers went to factories. But really when it picked up speed is the 60s, when we started talking about feminism and the me generation and individuality and how important it was to pursue your own personal ambitions and personal desires and pleasure. And it was all about pleasure. And so what we did is we diminished the role of caregiving in society because it was hard, because it was a responsible role, because it required sacrifice. And so when that happened and women were pushed to go out into the work world when they had very young children, I mean, Gloria Steinem said to women, if you don't work out in the work world, you are not part of our movement. And these were to women who already had young children. And she said things like, your kids will be just fine. And our kids are not just fine, particularly in the early years when mothers disappear. So babies are born incredibly neurologically and emotionally fragile, right? We know that the first 3 years, babies are not like other creatures ready to go. They're very fragile. And the thing that helps them to develop in a healthy way is that buffering from stress, but also mothers do this other important thing, which is they regulate babies' emotions from moment to moment. Every time a mother soothes a baby that's in distress, she's actually regulating their emotions. So babies aren't born with the ability to regulate their emotions. So Gen Z, the millennials, these were generations where anxiety and depression, which are disorders of emotional regulation. People cannot regulate their emotions. I always say that, when you're a baby, you're born with the ability to go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds with your emotions. You can go from being happy, happy, happy to being, wow, sort of like sailing a sailboat in the Atlantic in a storm. That's how babies are born. And it's only because mothers are physically and emotionally present to soothe the baby when they're in distress, to help the baby to regulate emotions, that it's more like sailing in the Caribbean.